Hello everyone, I am Zazubar, and welcome to Day 7 of Gamera Palooza. The 1970s were a hard decade for Dai. Despite the success of their Gamera franchise, and other success, kind of, including the Daimajin trilogy in the 1960s, they were still always struggling to stay afloat as a film studio and compete with other Japanese studios, particularly their main competitor, Toho. And the Gamera series, as it trudged along, started to show wear and tear signs of Dai starting to go under in terms of the financial side of things. And there is only one more Gamera movie made in the Showa series that Dai produced all on their lonesome before they went bankrupt in 1972. With that being 1971's Gamera vs. Zigra. Now, Gamera vs. Zigra, just like Gamera vs. Jiger, is a Gamera movie I haven't seen up until this point. I've seen clips of it, I knew the main story, and I had also seen the first couple minutes of the Mystery Science Theater riff that they did as their final riff on the Showa Gamera series. But I had never sat down and actually watched the movie in full. Part of that was because of the impact that it had on me when I saw it on the Mystery Science Theater episode. Impact being, wow, this looks really boring. I was not impressed with what I was looking at on that episode, though the riff was pretty funny. After seeing it tonight, I'm definitely going to go back and watch that riff at some point in the upcoming future. But as a movie, Gamera vs. Zigra really starts to show that, wow, the studio who made this wasn't doing well financially. There aren't a lot of destruction scenes for the first 45 minutes. The film overall really only takes place in one location, that being SeaWorld, Japan. It uses a lot of location shooting in order to tell its story. There's not many sets. There's really only one, with the exception, of course, of the miniatures used to represent SeaWorld Japan and during the monster attack scenes. Otherwise, they rely almost entirely on location shooting. The other set, of course, being the spaceship being used by Zigra, but even then, that's really only one room. So this movie really is very, very inexpensively made, and it looks pretty cheap. But we'll get into that, of course, when we talk about the special effects. I just wanted to establish the foundation for the rough financial situation of Dai at this time, and the fact that this is the last Showa Gamera movie they made all by themselves. And should really technically be considered the last of the Showa series, not just because of the desire by all Gamera fans to forget the upcoming film, but it really is the last of an era, the end of an era, because this is the last of a consecutive year-after-year release of Gamera movies, started in 1965 with the original Gamera, going up to this release with Gamera vs. Zigra. And really should be considered the end of the Showa series, but we'll get into that in the next review. For now, let's focus on the movie at hand, 1971's Gamera vs. Zigra. So, my initial impressions when I first saw this on the Mystery Science Theater episode were pretty spot on with the opinions that I had watching it for the first time this time. This movie is really, really boring, and it suffers from a lot of the same problems as Gamera vs. Virus did, and does a lot of the same things that Gamera vs. Virus did, mostly bad. Though actually it makes some slight improvements over that film in terms of concepts. But in terms of problems they both share, just like Virus, it's a very uninspired alien invasion story that focuses on a really small group of characters which doesn't really allow us to get the full scale of the alien invasion. And overall, the movie is just so uncreative and just super dull. It's so completely lifeless. It's so unexciting and nonchalant that it can't even attempt to make its audience feel any level of excitement or entertainment. It's one of the most boring monster movies I've ever seen. And aside, of course, from being completely boring, the story also makes very little sense, and is really, really hackneyed as an alien invasion story. You've seen this before. However, what it has over Virus actually comes in its alien invasion story, because it actually has a little bit of imagination, and Zigra's motivations are a little bit more interesting than Virus's, though not much, and while the motivation itself is interesting, nothing really is done with it. And of course, Zigra's design is a light year away from Virus' shitty design. I love Zigra as a monster, in terms of a basic design level. As a character, I think he's about as generic as Virus, except for the motivation thing, but we'll get into that when we talk about the monsters. But all in all, this movie is pretty terrible. It has very little to redeem itself. And as a last hurrah for Dai, it's kind of more of a whimper than a final big bang, which is really, really unfortunate. But we'll get into that after the plot synopsis. So I'm not going to go into too much detail with this one, because that would be ridiculous. Basically, what happens is a spaceship crash lands on Earth that is calling itself Zigra, with nothing on board except an ominous-looking head that's sticking out of the top of the wall, and a Japanese woman who's saying that she's also from the planet Zigra, but she's a member of the Zigra race. Just like Virus, they're very, very vague about what exactly Zigra is. Is it a race? Is it a planet? Is it one being? And they want to conquer the Earth because the Earthlings are destroying their beautiful seas, and Zigra itself wants to use the beautiful seas as a new home, because the oceans of their world have been polluted by sludge and other kinds of pollutants, and they don't want the same thing to happen to Earth seas, and want to relinquish the control of the seas from the Earthlings in order to use it for themselves. They kidnap 2 marine biologists and their children in order to get them to represent the Zigra people to the rest of the world, and tell them how much more powerful they are than Earth's people in terms of science, which they prove by causing several earthquakes that the likes of which have never been recorded before. And the marine biologists tell them to surrender, which they never really do, because as soon as they tell them, they then attempt to escape. But the Japanese woman who Zigra is mind controlling, who isn't actually from the planet Zigra, as we learn later in the film, puts them in some kind of hypnosis in order to stop them from causing any more trouble. Though why she doesn't do this to the kids really doesn't make any sense. The kids save their parents and then escape. And while Zigra attempts to then kill the children, Gamera shows up and flies the children who are on a boat to safety, and then Gamera flies away, not wanting to yet get in a confrontation with Zigra. Zigra then sends the Japanese woman who he has under his control up to the surface to get rid of the children, apparently for learning their secrets, but I really don't know what they think the kids know that they haven't already blabbed to the rest of the world in all of Zigra's little PSA announcements. Really doesn't make any sense. And the woman attempts to break into SeaWorld where the kids are living and kill them by chasing them around a la a Scooby-Doo episode, and going really, really slow because she decided to put a skirt on in order to blend in. Nice idea, lady. Meanwhile, Zigra in his spaceship causes a bunch of other earthquakes all over the world, and does a bunch of stuff that they don't show us, and we don't really get described that well because they didn't have the money to shoot Zigra going around destroying the world. At this point, he's still in his spaceship. Gamera shows up again, destroys the spaceship, and finally we see the fully formed Zigra, a giant silver shark-looking thing that grows to an abnormal size because he explains that the water pressure on Earth is different than that of his homeworld, so that somehow makes him larger. Okay, so he has a fight with Gamera, and Gamera actually kicks his ass until Zigra uses some kind of super omega yellow beam that looks exactly like the super ultraviolet ray from Gamera vs. Jiger, which isn't a ray really, it's more of like a field of hypnotic energy, and Gamera is put into some kind of trance, and Zigra knocks him upside down and puts him underwater. The humans have no way of stopping Zigra, of course, as always, and must, of course, look to Gamera for help in order to stop the invasion. However, they're not sure if he's alive or dead, and we get a similar scene to Zigra where the two marine biologists revive from their hypnosis by screaming into a walkie-talkie. Okay, which they do the same thing to the Japanese woman who was under the control of Zigra, and she too is relinquished of control, but isn't able to give them any intel because she doesn't remember anything from when she was under his control. So they go down in this bathysphere to try and revive Gamera, but they don't get to see what's wrong with them because Zigra attacks the bathysphere and threatens to kill them if Earth doesn't surrender, just like Gamera versus Virus. Ha! And Earth, just like it did in Gamera vs. Virus, is like, oh no, we can't sacrifice 4 people. Yeah, we'll surrender the whole world. But of course, again, they don't get the chance to surrender because the bathysphere retaliates against Zigra by turning on its bright lights and shocking him. And then the Japanese woman who is now talking over a walkie-talkie, giving them some kind of hint at how to defeat Zigra. She just says, as marine biologists, look at his characteristics and you will know how to defeat him. But we already know that Zigra is immune to bright lights. I mean, is damaged by bright lights. Is that what she's talking about? Because we already know that, lady. We never really get an explanation. Anyway, Zigra, out of anger, shoots his ray at the bathysphere and puts all the people inside into a hypnotic trance. Conveniently, right before they were about to run out of air, keeping them dormant so that way they don't die as they're down there for another 8 hours, as Gamera, that night, is struck by lightning and revived, and then goes to save the bathysphere from Zigra, who is now sleeping. Okay? Gamera saves the bathysphere, flies it up to the surface. The kids and the marine biologists are revived, again because they were put into the hypnotic trance. Gamera has a final confrontation with Zigra, destroys him by bringing him to the surface and blasting him with his fire, and of course the day is saved, and we all learn a nice big lesson about pollution. Yay. This is one of the slowest, dullest, most uninspired monster stories I have ever seen. It just elicits no kind of emotional response from the audience because it just doesn't do anything with any of its ideas. It's just such a by-the-numbers alien invasion story that it doesn't really have any impact. It just kind of happens. And we really don't even see much of it happen. Again, a lot of it happens off-screen, and the characters do such a shitty job of describing it that it has no impact even in that way. For instance, when Zigra starts attacking the world inside of the spaceship before his first fight with Gamera, the characters are so nondescript with what he's doing that we don't even know if he's come out of the spaceship or if he's just flying around in the spaceship destroying things. Given that when he first comes out of the spaceship he has a strange response to the surrounding water, I assume he must have been inside of it, otherwise that would have happened already. But we don't see any of it, so we don't know. We also don't know what he's doing exactly. Is he causing more earthquakes? I guess that's what he was doing earlier, or is he literally flying around zapping buildings with his laser beam? He does both things in the movie, so it's unclear. What this leads to is we don't quite feel the imposing nature of Zigra, thus we don't understand why the Earthlings are so afraid of him. He doesn't really do anything that imposing in the movie, aside from swim around in the water, attack Gamera, and kidnap some kids. Again, the impact of the earthquakes all over the world tearing cities apart is so small that, because again we don't see any of it, we see a couple of flashes of what I think is supposed to be Tokyo completely in rubble, but we don't really feel it because we never go there. Everything is just from such a small, unimportant perspective that we just don't care, and Zigra himself has no impact, and we don't feel him as an invader. That's actually something that Virus has over this. Virus actually has a little bit of imposing nature because we get to see Gamera destroying the world, whether or not it be stock footage. This, we don't get that at all. There are no destruction scenes in this movie, and without those destruction scenes, we don't feel the fear of Zigra. It's especially embarrassing because it's so laughable that he feels the need to send his mind-controlled woman after the kids, and she's so ineffectual at killing them. That's what she's supposed to do. And she does it in such a completely comical way that, again, it completely detracts from taking Zigra seriously. She walks into the kids' room. By the way, the kids' names are Ken and Helen. And she tries to strangle them, but knocks over a vase right before she walks up right behind them. And then they have a Scooby-Doo chase. It's literally just like a Scooby-Doo episode, I shit you not. They go in and out of hallways and come back out. They dodge her by hiding behind columns. It's so laughable and so campy. And it just completely takes away from the gravity of the alien invasion story and just does not allow you to see Zigra as any kind of threat. The only thing I really like about this movie story-wise is the motivation for the alien invasion, as I mentioned earlier. I think that in a different movie, with a different context and with a way more serious tone, the idea of an invader from another star coming down and wanting to conquer the world, thinking to save the world from us polluting our oceans, is actually a really good idea, and a really good idea to do in a Gamera movie. It's because Gamera is the guardian of the world, and he might have an interesting perspective on Earth destroying the rest of the world, because he might have a conflict of interest in that way. After all, Gamera lives in the sea, but still defends the Earth. So wouldn't he kind of have a conflict of interest there? It's an interesting idea, and the movie doesn't even touch on that at all. I just think if you were going to remake this story, that would be the tack to take with it. Is you'd have Zigra maybe try and get Gamera to join his side and join his cause because of his interest in the sea. Again, this movie doesn't really get into that, but I like that idea, and I think it could have been turned into an interesting monster story and an interesting alien invasion story. Again, it's not wholly original. I've seen this kind of thing done before, where aliens come down to try and save the world from us destroying it. That's what's done in Invasion of the Astro Monster with the Exilians. But it's the first time it's been introduced into the Gamera series, and it certainly gives Zigra a personality above a character like Virus. So, I do really, really like that. But the other thing is that I wish that Zigra wasn't perceived as so stereotypically evil. I mean, he doesn't laugh or anything like the aliens from Virus, but he's still a very stereotypical alien invader, and does a lot of really stereotypical things. Again, he tries to kill some kids, he mind controls people. I wish he would have played it more straight and been a more sympathetic type of villain. He should have just come down and said to the Earth, I am going to take the oceans from you because you are destroying them, and you don't deserve them, which is what he says in the movie, but again, he's not imposing at all, and he doesn't really do anything all that interesting to try and achieve this goal. That's my biggest problem with it, is that he just doesn't do anything. He just swims around really menacingly and tries to kidnap some kids. That's about it. Also, in regards to the whole ocean theme, both in the theme of the story being set almost entirely in the ocean, the villain coming from the ocean and trying to conquer the ocean, and the overarching theme, no, it's not really a theme, more of a preachy PSA message about humans polluting the ocean, I actually like that idea, and I think that it could have been turned into something interesting again if this movie would have taken itself a little bit more seriously, and if Zigra was given a little bit more weight and made less stereotypical. However, as it comes off in the movie, the whole pollution thing is so fucking preachy, it comes off as more of an after-school special than really the theme of a movie. And it's really only there to give some context for Zigra's motivations, and so as we talked about with Gamera vs. Guiron, the movie at the end can kind of come out, a character can tell us what we're supposed to take away from it, and the movie can feel like it accomplished something other than bore its audience to tears. As it stands, it really only did the latter and not the former. But overall, this movie doesn't work at all story-wise for me, and I think it's one of the dullest monster stories I have ever fucking seen. It is almost tied with Gamera vs. Virus in terms of an uninspired story that just gives you nothing. But with that being said, let's talk about the characters. I really don't have much to say. I didn't write down many of their names or anything, so I can't really say that much. But I didn't write them down out of laziness. I wrote them down out of, if I bring this up, it's going to make the review longer than it needs to be. Because to talk about the characters in this movie would be to talk around in circles. They're probably the most flat, boring, annoying characters in the entire series, probably right next to Gamera vs. Virus. The thing it has over Virus is that the kids and the adults aren't as assholish and unlikable as they were in that movie, but at least they had a personality. These characters have no personalities whatsoever. They're just all so bland and flat. I can't even call them archetypes because they have so little personality. I don't have an archetype to put them into. I guess you could call them scientific archetypes, but they don't have any personality in that way that would fit into those archetypes. They're just there. They have a little bit more to do in the story than the characters in Zigra did, but that doesn't matter. Regardless of how much they have to do in the story, if they suck, they still suck. And they really, really suck in this movie. The main kids, Ken and Helen, I talked about in Gamera vs. Guiron how making the kids younger helped the movie make them more likable because they were more innocent. I thought that when I was watching this, I was going to have the same reaction here, but no. These kids are the most annoying kids I've ever seen in a Gamera movie. They're more annoying than Masao and Jim in Gamera vs. Virus. And that's because these kids literally just have nothing going for them. Their voices are annoying, their dialogue is fucking atrocious and makes no sense. They're only there to scream Gamera and get into trouble. They don't do anything to help in the story, unlike Masao and Jim and Virus or any of the other kids. They don't do anything to help the story along. They just tag along with their parents and get into trouble. And they're also really, really bratty type of kids. I mean, they're kindergartners, of course, you know, that's what happens when you have kindergartners, but, I mean, they have their moments of being bratty. In a monster movie, they need to be more than that if we're going to focus on them as much as we do with these characters, and they just don't have anything going for them. They're the worst kids I have ever seen in a Gamera movie, and maybe I'll eat my words on this when I finally watch the next movie, but I think they're the worst in the whole franchise, so that's big words, I know, but that's how I feel about it. I think they're absolutely awful. The other thing is that it's kind of hard to keep track of who's who in terms of... I can tell the main two kids apart, Ken and Helen, but I can't tell who their fathers are supposed to be. There are two father characters in the movie. I think Ken's father is the not Onodera one, and then Helen's father is Onodera. I know Onodera, which is the actor who played Onodera in Gamera vs. Barugan. I think his name is Tom, and I completely forget the other guy's name, because he's barely in the movie, and I know he's Ken's dad, though, and Ken's dad really just has nothing to do in the story. Neither does I'm just going to call him Onodera. I'm sorry, guys. I'm just going to call him Onodera. And neither does Onodera, but at least Onodera gets somewhat of a personality. He's a little bit warmer, and I like that actor, so I just immediately have more of a connection to him. The other guy is just a fucking face. I have no idea what's going on with him. And the problem is that their characters are taken out of the movie for more than half of it because they're under hypnosis with no way of reviving them. So it's not like they have anything to do in the story. I mean, even when they go down to try and revive Gamera, they're not the ones who do it. That's a random lightning storm. So it's not even like they have that. But it's hard to tell who's related to who and exactly who is who. It's really hard to keep track of, and I think that that's a testament to just how crappy the characters are. The only character that I really kind of like is the astronaut lady who was under mind control by Zigra. She's a little bit interesting because she has to redeem herself for all the horrible things she did while she was under Zigra's control. Not that she really did anything that horrible. I mean, yes, she caused some catastrophic earthquakes, but again, we barely see those, so we don't really feel the weight of them. And she's so shitty at trying to kill the kids that we really don't even feel the weight of that either. Incompetence is the key to redeeming in this movie. And overall, she's the best handled. I like her. She's played by a good actress, which is a good thing. She does very well in the role, and she makes a very good distinction between when she's being controlled by Zigra and when she's of her own free will again. So that's good. But again, she can't save the characters in this movie. She may be the best, but she's still a little bit annoying. And she's especially annoying when she's so fucking cryptic with the marine biologists when she's like, Zigra, look at Zigra's characteristics. You'll know how to defeat him then. The fuck is that supposed to mean, lady? Because he looks like a shark, he's gonna be suggestible to... Is that what they're talking? I don't know. It's so vague, and again, it doesn't make any sense. And overall, the dialogue in this movie is atrocious. This is the worst written of the entire Gamera series. It is completely nonsensical. Again, I don't know how much of this is the translation I was watching by the Gamera Legacy Collection, but they're just awful lines that make no sense, completely head-scratching. And so many different things happen in this movie that don't make any sense. One of my other favorites is when the mind-controlled lady goes to the surface to try and go kill the kids. And first she steals a bathing suit from a woman who's leaving the beach. Then mind controls a woman and steals her clothes. And then gets a ride from one of the SeaWorld trainers up to SeaWorld, and all she says is that she's looking for these kids who live at SeaWorld. Isn't that a little bit suspicious to you, dolphin trainer dude? What the fuck is wrong with you? He asks for nothing from her, like, why do you need to see them, or what do you want from them? Nope, he is just like, okay, and then goes up and lets her into SeaWorld. Also, at this point, SeaWorld has become the headquarters for the fucking Japan Self-Defense Forces offensive against Zigra. What the hell are you thinking, dude? That'll bring us into the monsters, though. So let's start off with Zigra. I've talked a little bit about him already. Really the only other things I want to say is that he's absolutely the best thing about the movie. His design is fantastic. I don't know of many shark kaiju. Again, I haven't delved into the Ultraman franchise yet. I'm sure there are some there that I don't know about. But of the kaiju movies that I have seen, I don't think I've ever seen one based on a shark before. Especially one based on a goblin shark. That's really, really cool. And I like the idea of using deep sea monsters to try and, in terms of incorporating those into a monster design. You see this a little bit in Pacific Rim, but I think Zigra is one of the coolest giant monsters I have ever seen. Design-wise, he is fantastic. I'd love to see him crop up in a future Gamera film if they ever reinvigorate the franchise in that way. I know he pops up in the Dark Horse Gamera series based on Gamera Guardian of the Universe, which is really interesting. Though, based on what Dylan and Andres have told me, he's not really done much better there than he is here, which is kind of disappointing. Because he's got a great design, and again, I don't think his motivations are terrible, so I'd like to see him done better in another story than he was here. So all in all, Zigra's actually pretty good. He's just in a shitty movie, so that really sucks. I'm always a little bit on the fence about giant monsters with a really strong intelligence, or really high intelligence, because sometimes it makes them feel a little bit generic, because they just feel like typical supervillains then, and not like giant monsters. But it's actually handled pretty well here, because again, I like the idea of Zigra trying to conquer the world to save the oceans from the humans. That'd be really bizarre to do unless he had some kind of other higher intelligence. The problem is it makes him a little bit generic in the wider scheme of the franchise, because he's just another alien conqueror. So again, he's got potential, but they just don't do enough with him. The only other thing I really need to say about Zigra is his energy attack. It's really lame. So I don't mind the idea of a giant monster using hypnosis as a weapon, but it just doesn't make any sense with Zigra, because it's not like he hypnotizes people and then does anything with them except for the astronaut lady. When he keeps hitting his beam with Gamera, at first it just knocks Gamera out, and then it does nothing against Gamera. So he really doesn't get anything in terms of a good energy attack. It's really shitty. And not that Zigra really needs one either. I mean, his design is so cool, and he's got so many different sharp points on him that he really doesn't need an energy attack. So they should just gotten rid of the hypnosis beam, because it does nothing for the rest of the movie. So he has a really lame energy attack, but all in all, I really like Zigra from a design standpoint, and I think his motivations are decent. But what he does in the movie is so laughably nonsensical that it's hard to care. And again, it sucks that he was in such a crappy movie. But that'll bring us into Gamera. I haven't talked much about Gamera yet because Gamera really doesn't get much to do in this movie. He's pretty much relegated to the same things he's been doing for the past 2 movies, so there's really not much to say. His characterization is the same as Zigra, Gauss, Guiron, Virus. He's the friend to all children, defender of the earth, and pretty much the same things have happened to him that have happened before. Everything done with him is rehashed. Saving the kids, having to be revived by the military, having to be revived in general, killing the alien monster. It's the exact same thing that he's been done with in the previous films, and they do nothing interesting with him that they haven't done before. The only real thing I really need to say, and I said this last time, Gamera's face looks weird, man. His design is pretty much the same as Zigra, so I wasn't crazy about that because I don't love his design in Zigra. Again, his head is too snake-like, and his face just is really, really boxy, and I miss the more rounded features of the first couple of Gamera movies. So I just don't like his face, and they screw it up in this movie too. So that's unfortunately really all I have to say about Gamera, because as we'll get into next time, this is kind of the last time that he'll have anything new to do in a Gamera movie. But as I just said, he doesn't do anything new, even though all of his footage is new. So everything done with Gamera in this movie is just rehash from previous films, which is really disappointing. And all in all, Gamera really doesn't have any place in the story except to kill Zigra. One amusing tidbit about Gamera, though. We do get one new thing, but it's not really exactly a story point as much as it is a what the fuck moment. So the only thing we really learn about Gamera in this movie is that we learn that he has a sense of humor, because right before he brutally murders Zigra, he plays his own theme song on Zigra's back like a xylophone. That was the only scene in this movie that elicited any kind of an emotional response from me, was the sheer awesomeness at the complete campiness of Gamera playing his own theme song. Now I really want to see a Gamera Green Arrow crossover. If you Justice League fans out there got that, I tip my hat to you, good sir. That'll bring me into the special effects and the monster fights. The monster fights are okay. Again, I think in a different movie they could be done better, but they're really, really not that great. The underwater fights are okay, because that's where Zigra is supposed to be, where he's designed to fight. There's a couple interesting moves down there that they're pretty much relegated to Zigra flying past Gamera and cutting him up. But on the stuff on land is pretty dull. They pretty much just wave their arms at each other until one of them knocks the other one over, and then they use their respective energy attack against each other, which they do eventually until one of them dies, and of course that's Zigra. Their fights are very repetitive, and I think that, again, in a different movie with a higher special effects budget, it could be really, really cool. So that kind of sucks. The special effects overall really, really vary. The stuff underwater actually looks pretty good for the first time in a Gamera movie. Because a lot of it takes place down there, I think they had to step up their game a little bit, and it couldn't look as shitty as it did in Gamera vs. Virus, but even then, they're not great. The stuff on land looks pretty bad. Again, we have another... The issue is repeated from Gamera vs. Virus, where the monsters' mouths hang open way too much, and they just don't look like real creatures, and they wave their arms around too much. Gamera's arms are just like flailing, like he looks like one of those inflatable things outside of a car dealership. He doesn't look like a real monster. But again, they vary. Sometimes they're okay, sometimes they're awful. But they're not completely irredeemably bad. Again, Zigra himself actually looks really good, and the underwater stuff is an improvement over Gamera vs. Virus. But I think that's actually all I have to say about this movie. Again, there's really not much to talk about. It's so uninspired and dull, I just couldn't really think of much interesting to say. So actually, that's going to wrap it up for this review of Gamera vs. Zigra. So let's wrap it up. All in all, I think this movie is absolutely terrible. It's got some decent ideas, which carries it a little bit over Gamera vs. Virus for me, but the ideas don't save it. This movie is really, really bad. And just one of the most boring monster movies I have ever seen. It is just so uninspired and boring and dull and so... It fails on almost every level. As an alien invasion movie, it fails. As a monster movie, it fails. It just fails in every possible way. So, should you watch it? Probably not. Again, I can't even recommend the MST3K version of this movie because I haven't seen it in full yet, but I'm sure if you gotta watch a version of it, I would probably suggest that version, because the actual movie itself is just a bore. It's probably... Again, we'll see what happens when I watch the next one, though I'm sure the next one will outdo this one. But it's probably the most boring Gamera movie I've had to watch so far. Because at least when I was watching Gamera vs. Virus, I had some connection to it because I had seen it before. Because I'd never seen this movie before, I was just so unconnected to it that I was bored to tears. So all in all, I think this movie is awful. And because I think it's awful, but again, I think it's a little bit better than Gamera vs. Virus because of the decent ideas in terms of Zigra's motivations, and I like Zigra as a monster. I'm gonna give it the same score of a 1 out of 5. I would have given it a lower score if not for the better design and the better motivation, because I think it's actually more boring than Gamera vs. Virus, though it's certainly more worthwhile for those reasons. So that's why I'm gonna give it the same score of a 1 out of 5. So, oh boy, that was a rough one. And again, should have been considered the end of the Showa Gamera series, because after the bankruptcy of Dai, there were a couple of other attempts to make Gamera movies, including ideas such as Gamera vs. Garasharp, where Gamera was going to fight a giant cobra serpent monster. There were other ideas about other monsters for Gamera to fight, but all of these ideas got scrapped because Dai went bankrupt in the 1970s, and unfortunately the Gamera series was put on hold and concluded. Or was it? Until Dai was bought out by another studio. And that other studio decided to bring Gamera back for one last movie in the Showa series in 1980 with Gamera Super Monster. I hope you guys will join me for that review. Until next time, Zazubar out.